The storm howled as General Kraux collapsed at the dome's entrance, frostbitten, broken, defeated. Inside, the human didn't gloat. He simply knelt, handed over a heating pad, and said, "Because you're still breathing." But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Daniel's boots cracked the frost-bitten crust with every step, each one sinking into knee-high snowdrifts that concealed treacherous sinkholes and glacial splits. The horizon shimmered in hostile hues, steel-gray clouds swirling above jagged peaks, the light of a dying sun reflecting off a world not meant for warmth. The cold was not just physical, it was ancient, elemental, unbending. Even thoughts froze slower here. The wind screamed across the valley floor like something alive, clawing at the seams of his thermal jacket, slashing through exposed skin with icy teeth. His cheeks were already numb, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating, scanning the ridgelines not for shelter but for structure. Angle, elevation, windbreak, habitable curvature. Years of working on Earth's most extreme infrastructure, ice roads in Alaska, cooling towers in Qatar, underwater tunnels in the Arctic shelf, had taught him one truth: the environment wasn't your enemy, it was your material. He dropped to one knee and pressed his gloved palm against the base of a concave ridge. The snow was hard-packed here, but the ice beneath it sounded hollow. Daniel pulled out his thermal drill, small, clunky, barely holding a charge, and bored into the crust with careful thrusts. The drill's motor coughed and whined in protest, steam curling up from its nose. He didn't care. Every second spent here was another beat of survival stolen from the void. Behind him, the wind carried alien voices, not words, mockery. They weren't curious why he vanished into the glacier's shadow. They assumed he'd already frozen, buried himself in snow like the primitive mammal they thought he was. Let them think that. He carved until he found what he was looking for: a natural fissure, a crevice hidden behind a screen of snow. He widened it just enough to slip through and seal it again with blocks he carved from the wall. Inside, the temperature was still lethal but stable, insulated from the wind's roar and the murderous volatility of Heskar's atmosphere. Darkness swallowed him, but it was a darkness he could work with. He set his lantern in the snow, illuminating the narrow cave in golden light. Steam rose from his breath in slow, measured clouds. His fingers moved with practiced speed, laying out coils of emergency mylar, folding supports, marking the weakest ice. He didn't need hope or comfort. He needed structure. Daniel Carter wasn't here to endure. He was here to build. The air inside the dome clung to Sihari's feathers like a second skin, wet, warm, impossibly gentle after days of cruel exposure. Her breath hitched, not from fear, but confusion. Her talons curled against the makeshift floor, layers of foam scavenged from insulation kits, laid over flattened ration crates and melted snow. The air didn't bite here. It embraced. Her joints, frozen stiff for over a day, began to tremble under the weight of sensation returning. She had expected hallucination, frost-induced delirium, maybe a trap. But instead, she found something worse: humanity. Daniel moved with quiet efficiency, his hands bare, knuckles chapped and knotted with calluses. His sleeves were rolled past his wrists, revealing skin rubbed raw by rope and heat duct tape. He wasn't just surviving, he was working, siphoning the last reserves from a ruptured fusion cell, manually regulating its output so it didn't explode. Thin metal tubing, once part of a sensor array, was now coiled in spirals along the floor, hissing softly as hot water circulated through it. It wasn't a miracle. It was sweat, ingenuity, and desperation, made real. I tracked the water trail. Thought it might lead to a heat leak, Sihari murmured, her voice crackling like broken ice. She looked down at the cup in her claws. Lukewarm by human standards, but to her, it was life. Daniel watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. I let the pipe run low on purpose, he said after a pause. I wanted someone to find it. She blinked, pupils narrowing. You wanted company? No, he said simply. I wanted witnesses. Sihari tilted her head. Her species communicated as much with body language as with words, and every fiber of hers, ridges, feathers, pupils, registered a dissonance she hadn't felt since academy days. This wasn't military strategy. This wasn't survival instinct. It was intention. Daniel poured more water into a kettle over the heating coil. His hands moved slower now, not from caution but exhaustion. The kind that only came after days of solitary labor in the face of certain death. The kind of fatigue that earned its place. And still, he'd opened his door. Sihari lowered her head slightly, a gesture of respect in her culture, rarely offered outside of command hierarchy. Daniel barely seemed to notice. What's your plan? She asked softly. Don't die, he replied, and managed a crooked smile. And if I can help someone else not die, I call that a bonus. Outside, the wind howled on, uncaring. But here, beneath the ice, something improbable had taken root. Not a fire, not a rebellion. Compassion. The dome had grown. No longer a mere pocket of resistance against the cold, but a living structure built on interspecies cooperation and necessity. Walls that once barely contained Daniel's breath now bulged with grafted insulation, jury-rigged support beams, and patches sewn from uniforms of the dead. The seams leaked steam instead of silence. Inside, a warmth beyond temperature had begun to circulate. Daniel no longer moved alone. He coordinated without command. When the insectoid Vixar began vibrating to indicate hypothermic tremors, Daniel assigned her to thermal duct monitoring. Her compound eyes could spot leaks faster than any scanner. The aquatic, Tren, whose translucent skin had blistered from the dry cold, now handled water purification using a makeshift filtration rig built from oxygen scrubbers. Even the reptilian, whose name no one knew, had found purpose, curling its scaled body around exposed thermal coils to help retain heat during the night cycles. None of them spoke a common tongue. And yet, every gesture became understood. A nod, a glance, a tool handed wordlessly across species lines. Communication, born not from language, but shared pain and mutual reliance. Daniel led without leading. He slept less than anyone. His hands bore the toll, cut, blistered, some fingers now wrapped in adhesive tape made from ration wrappers. When his generator began to sputter, he didn't panic. He tinkered. When food ran low, he organized portioning without speeches or hierarchy. Just fairness. Just logic. And so they followed. When General Kraus staggered through the outer seal, the silence was thunderous. His breath rattled, one leg dragging like dead weight behind him. His uniform, once pristine, hung in tatters. Pride alone had dragged him this far, and it would not keep him alive another night. Daniel stood from where he'd been soldering a cracked heating plate. He didn't rise like a soldier greeting a superior, nor like a man preparing vengeance. He simply stood as a human, holding a heating pad wrapped in cloth that still steamed faintly. Kraus stared. The arrogance was gone. Only rawness remained. "Why?" he rasped, shivering. Daniel's voice was hoarse, flat, stripped of all performance. "Because you'll die otherwise, and I don't care what you said. I care that you're breathing." For a moment, No one moved. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. The warmth in the dome wasn't just thermal. It was earned. Every life preserved within these makeshift walls was not a tally of conquest, but a testament to a man who saw life before species. And for the first time in his long, brutal life, General Kraux lowered his eyes. The shuttle touched down with a muted roar, its engines disturbing the snowpack in a slow cascade of frost and ash. Twin landing lights pierced the storm's thinning veil, casting long, spectral shadows across the ice field where the last survivors stood. 12 figures, gaunt, scarred, eyes sunken but alive, waited in silence. Each wore remnants of the trial like war paint, cracked helmets, scorched gloves, field-torn uniforms hastily repaired with cords and thermal mesh. None of them had entered this test together, but all of them would leave it bound. Daniel Carter stood a few meters apart from the others, his posture loose but deliberate. He scraped the frozen salt from his beard with the back of his glove, watching without expression as the coalition envoy descended the shuttle ramp. The envoy was tall and immaculate, clad in polished chromasteel with golden emblems of office gleaming on the chest plate. Behind her, a dozen armed escorts fanned out. An unnecessary gesture, but one that spoke volumes about protocol. The envoy surveyed the group, her eyes pausing on the most wounded. A limping Kraux, a trembling Tren leaning on a metal staff, Sihari's bent wing tucked tight against her side. She turned, her gaze narrowing as it settled on Daniel. "Who organized this?" she asked, voice crystalline and sharp. No one answered at first. Then, slowly, Sihari stepped forward. She raised a hand and pointed, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of someone who had survived more than cold. Him. One by one, others followed. The insectoid Vixar clicked her mandibles and tapped her claw to her chest, then gestured toward Daniel. Kraux, once too proud to kneel, inclined his head in a gesture the Tharnians reserved for fallen comrades. Even the nameless reptilian hissed something low and reverent in its native tongue. The envoy looked back at Daniel. "Your species has proven adaptive," she said, measured. "But this wasn't expected. You didn't just survive. You unified the others. That is not a trait we've often seen in first-timers." Daniel met her gaze, unblinking. "I didn't unify anyone," he said. "I just built a place where people wouldn't die, that's all." There was a pause. Then, from the rear of the group, Sihari's voice rose, quiet but firm. "No, you built hope." The envoy studied Daniel for a moment longer. Then she nodded once and turned to her guards. "Provisional status. Full council review pending." They loaded onto the shuttle in silence. But as the hatch closed, one truth remained behind in the snow. No banners had flown. No battles had been won. But through nothing more than shelter, grit, and kindness, one human had shifted the axis of perception. Not with a speech, not with force, but with a dome of warmth in a world of death. And from the shadows, Daniel Carter allowed himself a breath, not of pride, but of peace. Because sometimes, survival is the loudest rebellion of all.